that any civilization that's going faster than the speed of light, their entire communication and energy systems, in fact, their entire spacecraft, crosses out of linear space-time into this non-local aspect of the cosmos, and their communication systems must use this nature of consciousness in order to be effective. That conscious mind, because of its nature, is omnipresent. It means that the mind itself is always everywhere. And it's sort of like what Erwin Schrödinger said, who was the father of particle wave theory that became quantum mechanics. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, it's a singularity. And so as you sit listening to this interview, think about the fact that you're hearing the words, but the conscious mind that's hearing them is this one light of consciousness that's shining within all people, within all beings, but also within all things. And it's an omnipresent field of conscious intelligence. And that's what we're talking about. And the experience of it and then the utilization of it, very specifically with technologies and techniques we've developed, is very key, because we have found, and we've had this confirmed by military and top secret people who've worked in studying the extraterrestrial spacecraft that have been retrieved over the years, that they have found that, in fact, their technologies interface directly from thought to the machine. So it's not even about touching some dials. It's about they think, and there's an actuation of that command in the spacecraft for guidance or for traveling through space. Very, very advanced technologies, and we're going to get into that and why it's so important that we understand this. When we look at this whole question of how extraterrestrial civilizations might choose to communicate with us, we have to kind of get out of our anthropocentric, human-centered view of things that are locked into early 21st century technologies, because we're dealing with civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to perhaps millions of years more developed than we are. By virtue of the fact that they're traveling easily through interstellar distances, they're not going to be using, Exxon Jet A fuel. They're not going to be using fossil fuel energy systems. They're not going to be using electromagnetic communication systems that go at the speed of light, because it would be impossible to communicate through the distances of interstellar space. So you have to really begin to open the mind scientifically and analyze and question, how then might they communicate? How then might they interact? And it'll be in, as Dr. J. Allen Hynek said, who was initially an Air Force astronomer debunker of all this and later became a big advocate of it, he said it's just a lot of high strangeness, and yet it makes total sense when you begin to look at it from the point of view of the vastness of space and the fact that linear communication and linear travel is just too slow. You can't go interstellar at anything at the speed of light or lower, nor can you communicate. So when you begin to accept that as a fact and begin to then think, well, what then might be the various manifestations of a higher extraterrestrial civilization's technologies and how they might choose to interact and communicate, you really go beyond what I call the crossing point of light. You go beyond this light barrier, like we went beyond the sound barrier back in whenever it was, the 40s, 50s. I can't remember when we broke the sound barrier with a jet. But now we're talking about going past the light barrier. And the crossing point of light is when you begin to realize that most of what exists in the cosmos is resonating at frequencies beyond the speed of light, and that includes what some call the whole astral field energies and etheric, but also thought, consciousness, and all of that. And that any civilization that can go from some star system to here has had to figure that out, and has also had to make it a science and make it a something that actually can be routinely used. And that's what we're dealing with. And so that's why, so for some people, they think I've taken a kind of a left turn into consciousness studies and higher states of consciousness with the work that we're doing with our diplomatic effort with these advanced civilizations. I point out that it's actually the foundation of our contact work and of the foundation of universal peace and of communication and diplomacy is to understand this. And if you can't understand it, then you're going to be very, very limited in understanding all the ways that these advanced interstellar civilizations might interact with us or may choose to, because they don't necessarily have to be using early 21st century Earth technologies. Why would they, any more than we're using smoke signals to communicate from Los Angeles to New York? I mean, we're not using smoke signals anymore. So I think that we have to be open-minded about this, and I think that this thing opens this whole question then, how do we develop that ability? And we're going to talk about that in the next half hour or so, is that, how do we get from understanding this sort of as a grasp or an intellectual understanding to then being able to practice it? And this is a really big part of what we'd like to share with the listeners at the World Puja Network, is this understanding that everybody has within them the entirety of the universe folded. I'm reminded by a Persian mystic that said, thinkest thyself a puny form when within thee the universe is folded. And that's a literal statement that because of the nature of the conscious mind within you, everyone has the entire cosmos folded within them and accessible to them through the nature of this non-local, unbounded component of mind. And no one is without that. If you're a human being, you have it within you. It's a matter of awakening to it and beginning to know how to utilize it, and then specifically how to utilize it for interstellar civilization communication, which is really very important, because we're at a time now where, since we know we're being visited by various extraterrestrial civilizations, and that they are wanting to reach out to humanity, but the only answer they've gotten back from our governments have been to be shot at, shot down, and also lied to the public about. So what we're trying to do at cseti.org is to say, look, let's have a citizens diplomacy effort, but the foundation for that is the understanding and experience of this higher state of conscious mind that's within all of us.
Another thing that about the ETs, and you talk about just awakening to our own innate capabilities that we don't even know we've had, and one of them is being able to see the ETs and their craft in their astral form. And these are things that are there, and anyone could see them, but most people don't use their inner vision well enough, and we've developed that skill, and you just people would be amazed at the things that we see in the astral form, which is how the ETs and their craft often have to appear these days, because our weapons technologies now are so sophisticated that it's dangerous for them to come in materialized form.
Yeah, we often will see these phases between being completely materialized and solid and then dematerializing. And you understand that the individual, us as individuals, are all sort of fountains or focal points or entry points for this unbounded being, the great being, the unbounded mind that's within us. And by using this mantra meditation, which is something we now have put onto this 2-set CD that people can get at disclosureproject.org, you can learn to do this, and what happens is that you will find that then you're ready to go to the next step, and that is to go into the remote viewing mode and to be able to see remote planets or starships or ET vehicles that might even be around Earth, and invite them in a spirit of peace to wherever you are, assuming you're out someplace that's private. You're not going to pull them into your, right in the middle of the city. But although that's happened as well, I might add. We've had people experiment with this, and they've had these amazing sightings right in their backyard. But I think that the reason this is so powerful is not so much so that people can see an ET craft. It's because by doing this, it creates this resonant field, this morphogenic resonant field that begins to affect everyone on the Earth and the future of the Earth, and manifest this time of universal peace, which is the only possible future. Everyone gets all wrapped up in the current state of the world, and what I point out is that a lot of that noise is just the death throes of an old yuga, an old era that's passing away in front of our eyes. But what we are having to do is create the foundation for a new civilization, one that is universally at peace, going into space peacefully, that lets the truth be known about all these things, and also allows these wonderful new energy and propulsion technologies to be used for peaceful and not military purposes, so that we can have free energy, no pollution, and have abundance for all the world's children, so that there's not just a few people, 20% or so of the world doing well, and the other 80% in terrible poverty with, barely knowing, where the next meal's coming from, if that. So I think that all of this is very connected, and it happens first on the level of thought and consciousness.
What I really love about the mantra having a tone or tune is that it sticks in your head, like usually some really lame radio commercial or something, ditty would stick in your head, and instead you've got a mantra in your head. It's very calming, but I always think, just imagine if people all over the world had that mantra running through their minds, what a nicer world we'd have.
Well, and it's a very powerful technique for transcendence, for going into this unbounded state of awareness. And as a meditation technique, it's very powerful. And what I point out is that what we're doing with CSETI is, where most people think the ending of the process is the beginning for us. In other words, the arrival at the state of pure mind and samadhi, then we go into the remote viewing mode, and then from there, after we see and remote view these ET civilizations or spacecraft, then we vector them or guide them into our location by a series of imaging, which I call coherent thought sequencing, which is in a meditation set that is at disclosureproject.org. And the purpose of that is so that we can actually make open, peaceful contact. And what's amazing is that if people will do it with a pure heart, with an open mind, without fear, and in a state of really wanting to manifest this state of this universal peace, what's beautiful about it is that we have never been disappointed. I mean, we do this 4 or 5 weeks out of the year, where we go, sometimes 6 weeks out of the year, where we go all over with groups ranging from 25 to 50 people, and we have never been disappointed. And I'm convinced that these extraterrestrial civilizations are really eagerly awaiting more and more people. Imagine if millions of people started understanding this and doing it. Well, there's no power on Earth, there's no government on Earth who could then stop it, because it's just not able to be stopped when enough people do it with that intent. We have within us this universal field of consciousness, and we can develop it, and how that it can then be an applied consciousness science, where we can use it for the good. We can use it for the transformation of the Earth. We can use it for making peaceful contact with these visitors, and we can create this wonderful time of universal peace for this planet. This is something that is not a question of if it's going to happen. The only question is when and how and who. And I always say people have misinterpreted this thing where they say, well, many are called but few are chosen. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's many are called but few choose to answer the call. That's the correct translation. And so people have to realize this is a planet of free will. We have to choose to be at service for something this important and this far-reaching. But if we do, we'll just be delighted with the kind of wonderful and amazing things that will happen not only in our lives, but in the world. And we're seeing this now. As I mentioned, we've been modeling this open contact with visitors for 18 years, and now we have a major G7 country that has, in the last year and a half, been communicating with us through their Ministry of Defense to set up these contacts with these visitors, so that can then be all filmed, and then it can be disclosed to the world.
However, you need to understand that the technologies that we have, and we were discussing, are not theoretical. We have actionable intelligence that any committee in Congress or executive action can find regarding current operations. And I just want to go through a list of them very quickly, of these facilities and corporations for which we have witnesses who can be subpoenaed by the committees of the Congress. This was developed at the request of Congressman Christopher Cox of Orange County, with whom I met, and was later further developed for the briefing that we put together for President Obama. These facilities are the Edwards Air Force Base and subsections where at the dry lake bed where the Lockheed Skunk Works operations, Haystack Butte, China Lakes, George Air Force Base, and the closed Norton Air Force Base, where an anti-gravity device, so-called alien reproduction vehicle, for which we have the schematics, was seen by Frank Carlucci and others on our witness team. Tabletop Mountain and Blackjack Control. The aerospace facilities there are the Northrop Anthill Facility, Tejon Ranch, the McDonnell Douglas Llano Plant, Lockheed Martin Hellendale Plant, and the Phillips Lab. At the Nellis Air Force Facility, so-called Area 51, no one calls it that. There's S4 and S12, Pahut Mesa, Groom Lake, and a number of sub-facilities. The most important facility is in Utah, near Provo, the Dugway Proving Grounds, all of which is underground, and the airspace above it is classified. There are no roads into this facility. The New Mexico facilities include Los Alamos National Labs with underground connectors to the so-called Dulce area where the biological work is being done, and Kirtland Air Force Base. And the complex there includes Sandia National Laboratories, Phillips Labs, Manzano Mountain Weapons Storage Facility, Coyote Canyon, and the White Sands Complex. In Arizona, near Fort Huachuca, which is Army Intelligence Headquarters, there is a UGB underground base where one of our witnesses, who will testify, worked on 9 separate extraterrestrial vehicles that had been down through advanced electromagnetic pulse weapons, and there are several different species of extraterrestrial biologicals stored at that facility. The other facilities, and this goes on, include a special compartmented area of Cheyenne Mountain, where we have witnesses in our team who can be subpoenaed, where we have tracked extraterrestrial vehicles in our solar system that were measuring 26 miles in diameter. There are also facilities in Australia, a key one being Pine Gap, the so-called Alice Springs facility, which is mostly a U.S. Air Force facility, even though it is in Australia. I recently talked to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia about this. Also, the Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center. We have a scientist at the Redstone Arsenal who works under contract for IT&T who have developed these transdimensional systems. He was under contract with my project to bring these energy devices out, and he was then threatened by a former CIA director and what I call the goon squad that went down there 3 years ago in March. This is just part of the information we have, and this information is on the flash drive given to Stephen Bassett's staff, then that you're all welcome to review. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
and I think in the early days, I'm talking the 1930s, 1940s, they didn't really know what they were dealing with. They also did not understand the technologies. And I think that they also didn't know why these visitors were here. For example, the big increase in all the sightings around the world happened at the time when we began to detonate nuclear weapons. This is not an accident. And I've been told by senior intelligence officials that essentially a big red flag went up over our planet saying we were in trouble. But not only are we in trouble, but we could be a threat to others, because you combine going into space, the early stages of space travel, and the use of hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, and a civilization on Earth that was still very violent, as you look around the Earth even today, of course. So this is something that any enlightened or even self-interested civilization observing the Earth, which I think we've been under observation for thousands of years, would be greatly concerned. But our military and government were completely shocked by this and didn't know what to do with it. I think that's the early, but later, I understand, of course, President Eisenhower wanted to make an announcement about this after he had a meeting near Edwards Air Force Base in 1954. But he was prevented from doing so by what he later called the military-industrial complex, because the interests for secrecy are really fall into three broad areas. One is the inertia of the secrecy. Once you start something secret and you have made so many lies and frankly killed so many people and threatened so many people, and you've lied to Congress and you've lied to presidents, how do you bring this out? They painted themselves into a black box, black corner. The other, so that's the inertia. The other is that there were orthodox religious interests that did not know what to make of this. And I've had discussions with senior levels at the Vatican to discuss this. And today, most mainstream religious groups would say, well, there's one supreme being in the universe, and there are many children of God, and we're all children of God. This is what Monsignor Balducci said when we interviewed him at the Vatican. But the Orthodox and fundamentalists would view this in a very disturbing way, because it would upset their worldview. And I think then the biggest became the technological and scientific end of this. Once we retrieved, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, several of these extraterrestrial vehicles and began to study them, we combined that knowledge with knowledge we already had. Because remember, we had some people like T. Townsend Brown and the B-Field-Brown effect who were studying anti-gravity quite independent of this issue back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. But when their information got combined with studying these spacecraft, they figured out, this is how they're working. And they realized it's the end of oil. It's the end of the need for coal. It's the end of the combustion engine, the internal combustion engine. It's the end of transmission lines for electricity, because the energy that these spaceships are using, what people call UFOs, we don't call them, no one in the business calls them UFOs. They are not unidentified and they don't fly. We'll get to this. But these objects are extracting energy from the fabric of space, okay, around, not outer space, but the fabric of space. And in fact, even the early Lockheed and Northrop experimental spaceships that we have built, and we're talking 1950s and 60s, were called flux liners because they were pulling energy from the quantum flux field, what's called the quantum flux field that's in the space in this room. And every cubic centimeter of space, for example, in this room has enough energy to run the Earth for a day. It's a huge amount of energy. And so once this was really figured out by the mid-50s, long time ago, 50 years ago, they knew that this would be the end of the oil cartels and the international financial petrodollar system, and a huge amount of the industrialists would then have to change their whole way of operating. Because think about it. What happens when every village in India or sub-Saharan Africa can have a device that looks like a generator, and it's extracting energy from this quantum flux field? Suddenly, you have an economic growth all over the world. And this is a wonderful thing. It would be the end of poverty. But it would also be the end of the economic hegemony, where Europe and America, with 600 million people, dominate the whole global economy of 6 billion. So this is a huge geopolitical problem. And so the issue isn't about just money, it's about power. Who has the power? How the Earth is run? Who is running Earth? And then you have another issue, and that is there are people who view the world as they understand it. And in America we have a saying, if you wear rose-colored glasses, you see everything in the world is rose-colored. But if you're wearing glasses that are conflict-colored, colored with a sort of paranoid and militaristic view of the world, you're going to view these visitors as a threat, and you're going to respond to them as a threat, even though there's no evidence that they're a threat. I want to be very clear on this. There's no objective evidence that anyone has been harmed by these visitors, and there's certainly no evidence that they're a threat to us. There's a lot of evidence, however, that they're concerned about our threat to the peace and the order of space. Why? Because our technological capabilities and our weapons have surpassed our social and spiritual development, clearly. And we are at that stage in the evolution of a global civilization where our science and technology has gotten way out there, but our social and spiritual is lagging. And this is that danger zone. And Earth is in this danger zone now. And they know this. These visitors from other civilizations, other planets know this. So, unfortunately, I think that they have had a great concern about our nuclear facilities. We know this. We have colonels and lieutenant colonels who are Strategic Air Command and the Atomic Energy Commission who have testified at disclosureproject.org that every single one of our nuclear weapons storage areas have been visited by these ET spacecraft because they were obviously concerned. And in the Soviet Union also, in Russia. We have spoken to people with the KGB and with their space command. And so it's clear that they have that concern, but that doesn't mean that they're hostile towards Earth. I think they're concerned about human hostility. And I think, however, this has gotten misinterpreted because here's the risk. In the vacuum of secrecy, when you have this vacuum of secrecy, it's very easy to begin to believe your own worldview, and there's no one telling you differently. This is the danger of a program being hermetically sealed and kept this secret, because they do not get the perspective and it's gotten out of control. And Eisenhower said when he left office in 1961, beware the military-industrial complex, because it can become a threat to our security, our way of life, and our democratic institutions. And he was a five-star general and a conservative Republican, but he was very concerned. And why? We have people who worked with him in the White House at that time who have told us, who are witnesses for our group, that he had been stabbed in the back by people who wanted to keep this secret and actually trumped or violated his presidential power and took these projects and hid them deeper and deeper and deeper. This is a very dangerous thing in a world where you're dealing with technologies this powerful. And this was, of course, President Clinton's frustration. President Clinton asked Webster Hubbell, who was third in command at Justice, to look into two things. And this is in his book, Webster Hubbell's book, Friends in High Places. Clinton wanted him to find out about what are these UFOs and, who's keeping it secret and why, and who killed Jack Kennedy, because Jack Kennedy was his hero. Well, we discovered there was a connection. But, and his CIA director, R. James Woolsey, was equally worried, because when I met personally with Woolsey here in the Washington area in December of 1993, he was very gravely shaken by the fact that there was a secret cabal or a whole level of government and corporate activity dealing with this issue that was lying to him as the CIA director and as also to the president. So this is a very serious problem, and so the secrecy is related to a number of related issues. One is this inertia that happens when you have this large ongoing historical problem of secrecy. The other is certain orthodoxies of both religion and science that people don't want out. Because obviously, if you own a $1 trillion oil field, or a company that's assets are in that range, remember, this is not particularly good news for you. It's good news for humanity and for the earth and for the environment. But there's only a few hundred people and corporations who really control the world economy. And this information would change forever their grip on that power. Now, they would still have a lot of money, but it's not about money. You and I think of money, can I afford to put my son or daughter to college, or buy a home, or what have you. They're viewing it as power, the geopolitical control. So it's a power issue. And this would change geopolitics forever.